Welcome back to the Universalis podcast and Happy Christmas. I am Martin Kochański, the creator of Universalis, and in this episode I'll be looking at the highlights of the week ahead, starting with Sunday the 29th of December. Weeks don't count for much in the Christmas season, so this cutting it in half just because there is a Sunday may feel a bit artificial, but there we are. Perhaps this timing is a good thing after all, because it makes us pause for thought in the middle of all the Christmas celebrations. The size of these celebrations. You may wonder why the Feast of the Coming of the Lord is so splashed out all across the calendar. I think you can get a sort of picture of what is going on from looking at Christmas cards. When they show you the Star of Bethlehem, they don't show you what a star really is. A small bright dot, a dot as bright as the sun but tiny. They show a dot with needles of light pointing from it, sometimes 4, sometimes 6, sometimes 8. They are showing not what the dot is, but what it looks like. Or you might say, not what the dot is in itself, but what the dot is for us. And if you think about it, all our theology does the same kind of thing. It has to tell not the truth as it is, but the truth as we are able to see it. If you look at the Feast of the Coming of the Lord, its beams of light shine in all directions. They shine back as far as the Annunciation on the 25th of March, when it all began because Mary said that it should. They shine forward as far as the presentation in the temple on the 2nd of February, 40 days after the birth of Christ, when Simeon saw the biggest thing possible had happened at last, and now he could die in peace. As for the 12 days of Christmas themselves, from Christmas to Epiphany, they are when these light beams interpenetrate and fill the time not only with light, but with pattern. There is a lot to celebrate. We have the birth of Jesus in the stable, which is witnessed by hardly anyone. We have the shock wave of glory throughout all creation at the event, celebrated in heaven by the angels. That is witnessed by the shepherds, who are just the right witnesses, once you think about it, because they are following the same occupation as David, the shepherd boy who became king, and they spend night after night with nothing getting in the way between them and the stars. We have the adoration of the shepherds. Then we have, or will have next week, the absolute opposite, the Magi who do not sleep under the stars, but study them and their motions, who are not natives but foreigners, Gentiles, probably Zoroastrians, and who bring worship and rich gifts and perplexity and unintentionally great danger. You couldn't cram all that into one day, and that's why it's spread out into a season, pinned to Christmas Day at one end and the Epiphany at the other. One thing to notice about the celebrations of the core of the Christmas season, they are all baby things. It is the baby Jesus that the shepherds come to see. It is the infant Jesus to whom the wise men bring their gifts. Now, to be frank about it, a baby is all very well and a big event for its parents, but to the wider world there's really no point to it at all. One baby more or less can never make any difference. We do need to get from Jesus a baby that makes no more difference than any other baby to Jesus, the man, who changes the universe forever. That is what the Feast of the Holy Family is all about, because it is in the context of the family that each of us grows from a yelling object with nothing but needs to a someone, as someone who can do things, if you like, as someone who can truly say, I. And although every child likes to think of itself as being entirely self-sufficient and self-constructed, the parents and the family are what shapes the child from babyhood, through childhood, all the way to being an adult and being an I. Jesus is true God and true man. So, at Bethlehem, he is true God and true baby. In Nazareth, he is true God and true child. And at Jerusalem, at the Passover, as a boy of 12, he is true God and true boy. If you forget this fact, it is possible to misread the gospel of the finding in the temple quite badly, and since that is this Sunday's gospel, let's try to read it right. The story is a familiar one because it is also the last of the joyful mysteries of the Rosary. Jesus goes with his parents to Jerusalem for Passover. He is 12, old enough to be hanging out with his friends rather than staying with his father and mother. Being good parents, they let him do it. Consequently, when he gets left behind, no one notices until the end of the first day of the homeward journey. Then the parents have to go back, a day's journey in itself. They scour an overcrowded city until at last, in despair, they visit the temple, and there he is, talking to the teachers and the doctors and amazing them with his understanding. His parents tell him off, and he says to them, "Didn't you know I had to be about my father's business?" In terms of movie plots, this is a perfect story of the cosmic superchild revealing its star quality. It is the story of the cuckoo revealing itself to its foster parents. It is God made man putting his merely human carers in their place. If you were filming it, you would make an otherworldly light shine out of the divine child's eyes. It is all a compelling story, narratively and cinematically, and if you look at the gospel in this way, then you have got it all wrong. What people forget is that when Jesus was 12, he was a 12-year-old. The only excuse I can think of for people who take the cinematic superchild view of this gospel is that they have never been 12 themselves. I have. Here is a story. It has nothing to do with teachers or temples. It is the story of how, as a 12-year-old boy, I defused a bomb. I was walking back to school from the nearby village across a bare hill in the middle of the Somerset countryside, and I heard something ticking. Obviously, something that ticks is a bomb, so I went up to it and investigated. I tried pushing here, pressing there, bending somewhere else. Eventually, something broke and the ticking stopped. I had defused the bomb. Now, if you had asked me at the age of 12 how likely the Irish Republican Army was to plant a bomb on a bare hill in the middle of the Somerset countryside, half a mile from a Catholic school, I would have given the correct answer. Not at all likely. If you had asked me at the age of 12 what one should do if one discovered a bomb, I would have given the correct answer. Stay away from it and go and tell someone in authority. I was quite intelligent when I was 12. Whatever question of this kind had been asked, I would have answered it correctly. But there was no one near me to ask those questions, so I acted according to an overwhelming impulse. I was acting for the best. It is regrettable that in acting for the best, I broke the machine the farmer was using to energize his electric fence. I expect his cows strayed as a result. I am sorry about that, but it was not a sin, it was simply being 12. Here is a simple way of putting it. All the strands of thought I needed were there, and they were good, strong strands. They just weren't connected. They weren't twisted together to make a rope. Ask Jesus at the age of 12 whether he should pay attention to what his parents tell him, and he will give the right answer. Yes, of course. Should he worry them by disappearing? No, of course not. Ask him what the commandments say about parents, and he will answer correctly, "Honor your father and your mother." But all the same, nothing holds together. The impulse comes, and the 12-year-old Jesus follows it. His mind is full of sound strands, but they don't add up to a rope. Now let's draw some real morals from the story. First, let's look at ourselves and how we judge actions. When judging actions, we imagine our minds as a stable monarchy, controlled from the top by one clear will. It is a will that considers every action in detail before doing it. It considers the circumstances. It considers the consequences. It reaches a conclusion. It acts on that conclusion. In the moral world, this picture is the equivalent of the ideal straight lines and perfect right angles that you reason about when you do geometry at school. As abstractions, they work, but in the real world, everything is only approximately straight, only approximately right-angled. Yes, the angles of a rectangle always add up to 360 degrees, but if you sit down to make a book cover and you cut out a piece of cardboard with 3 right-angled corners, you are surprised and gratified when the 4th corner turns out to be a right angle as well. In the ideal world of geometry, this was inevitable. In the real world of actual physical materials, there is nothing inevitable about anything. Jesus will have learnt this about the physical world if he ever imitated his father in making things. You measure where you are going to drill the holes in a piece of wood, and you drill the first hole according to the measurement. but you never ever drill the next hole at once. Before that, you put the wood into the place it is meant to go and see whether your second mark still has any relation at all to where the next hole really needs to be. When we judge actions, we judge them with ideals just as we do geometry at school with ideals. But just as geometry in practice is far from ideal, so moral agency in practice is far from ideal. The rope is made up of strands, and in a 12-year-old the strands don't hold together very well. There are many lessons to be learned about the moral life of human beings, but this is a good one to start with, and Jesus in the finding in the temple has just learnt it for himself. There is a big difference between the chaos of the human mind and the eternal order of the mind of God. And God, simply as God, could never have known this, just as God, simply as God, can never know the taste of chocolate. Only God as man can have the knowledge of what it means to be man, and thus know how to heal the breach between God and man which has lasted since the time of Adam. The visit to the temple was the research trip in another way. Jesus would have found carpentry fascinating because it was his earthly father's trade. It was an example before him every day of how an adult acts, and there is nothing that a child wants more than to be an adult. Now, in the temple, he sensed the same attraction, though it isn't at all clear that he yet knew why. He was, without fully realizing it, discovering what the people best placed to know about God, the teachers and the doctors, actually knew about God. Jesus needed to get into their way of thinking in order to discover how to bring salvation to us all. One could have imagined that the people most expert and assiduous in prayer and thought about God might have been the closest to God and the perfect leaders of the whole human race towards reunion and reconciliation between God and man. It was not so, and Jesus in the temple had begun to find that out. They were wise, yes, and learned, and they even recognized something special in Jesus himself, but somehow they were simultaneously close to the answer and missing the point. You can see the reflection in the attitude of the adult Jesus to the Pharisees, that they have got it all, almost, that they have got hold of the right stick, but the wrong end of the stick, that they have got the final piece of the jigsaw puzzle in the right place, but they are holding it upside down, that they see God's finger pointing them in the right direction, and like a dog, all they do is come and sniff the finger. It is no wonder that the boy Jesus, confronted with the raw material of what his life was going to be all about, completely forgot about meals, sleep, night and day, parents, and everything. There is one difficulty left with this gospel. It is Jesus' dishonouring of his father and mother when he tells them, "Didn't you know I had to be in my father's house?" This is one reason for embracing the galactic superchild interpretation of the whole episode, but think of something else. Who is telling us this story? It isn't St. Luke. He is only reporting it. The story can only come from Mary, the mother of Jesus. And if you have had a mother, then you will know there is one thing mothers do. They cherish little stories from your childhood when you thought you were being grown up, but were in fact being the exact opposite. These stories can be given the general title of "Wasn't He Sweet?" or "The Funny Things Children Say." Either way, mothers love telling these stories about their children as a kind of celebration of a childishness that is now long past. I once barged into a party my parents were having, where everyone was happily talking 19 to the dozen, and loudly announced, "If anyone is bored, they can come and look at the model car I've just finished." If you can imagine the fondness with which my mother repeated that story, you can imagine the fondness with which Mary told the story of "Don't you know I need to be about my father's business?" That's all for this week. If you'd like to write to us about anything, send an email to universalis@universalis.com. We look forward to hearing from you. Have a good week in every sense, and end this year of our Lord on the right note, and let's pray for one another.